regarding load balancer, what is the meaning of a load balancer, right? Load balancers are generally going to do three functions, okay? Three important functions. One is your, of course, we normally call that as a proxy load balancing appliance, okay? And it will do, it will do both, as it will work as a proxy plus it will work as a load balancing appliance, okay? This is like first function, it's like second function. Now third function is very important. It will be for monitoring the host, okay? Third function is to monitoring the host. Now a basic idea of what is proxy, and I'll teach you, hold on. The basic idea is you have this outside client sitting having any sort of internet access, doesn't matter, right? This is the world of, they plug to some ISP somehow, okay? Now this ISP connects to your local branch or local data center, and you have this LTM appliance present over here. And what LTM is connected is through the company's outside devices like the router and the firewall. The LTM is connected to the internet, and the LTM would have the connectivity with what? With your backend servers, right? So the LTM would be connected to your backend servers like server 1, server 2, and server 3. Those are technically will be called as application servers because they will house different types of application, right? Different types of application requests so that they can process. Like they will be called as an HTTP based application server, HTTPS application server. Generally, we call them as a web server, right? Or FTP server, TFTP server, DNS server, and so on and so forth, right? So now what happens is, they will maintain, what this outside client needs to do is, this client need to contact this LTM device and need to establish something called as a TCP connection. So we need something called as a TCP based connection, which has to come from outside to the LTM, and the LTM would intercept that TCP connection, okay? Intercept means what? It will actually take the TCP connection, it will check what all packets that I'm receiving on the TCP connection, will intercept that, understand the packet that he is receiving, and it will create another TCP connection from his end to a selected backend server, right? And on that particular TCP connection, what it will do is it will send the outside traffic, okay? So generally what this guy is doing, this is acting as a proxy. So you are responding on behalf of somebody, right? So generally what happens is you have a proxy server and you have got this outside, might be your client of your company, and you connect to the proxy server, and from that proxy server you connect to internet, right? So basically your request is going to the proxy server, and why it goes? Because of multiple reasons. Might be you are doing caching over here, you are doing content filtering on the proxy server, right? So that they're a monitoring team and they can see what all contents you are trying to send to the internet from your inside network. So proxy server is an important thing, right? And it works on some well-defined port. So your client request will go whenever the client wants to reach to internet. The browser of the client is configured in such a way that their request will go to the proxy server to the configured port, and he will do the caching and content filtering job. And from there, the traffic will be either, if it is good traffic, as per the proxy rules, it will be allowed to reach to the internet. Now, there are multiple types of proxy server, guys, right? So LTM is actually working like what? As a proxy server, because it is taking the connection from outside, intercepting it, understanding the connection patterns, and then it creates a separate connection from his end to the backend server, and it is doing the job of what? Proxy, right? There are different types of proxy servers. You know about it. So I've got different types, which is one of them is called as a forward proxy, right? There is one forward proxy, and I think there is one that called as reverse proxy, right? So proxy server operation can be of two types: forward proxy and reverse proxy. So 99% in your environment, you'll have what? You'll have forward proxy. This is very often deployed, right? So very simple. So what a forward proxy means, what? The same thing that I've drawn here. So you'll have the client, okay? The client would make a request to your proxy server based on the browser configuration. You would take the request, you do the caching, content filtering task as is configured to do. Then it will allow the traffic to go to your internet, might be your ISP, and from there the traffic would be thrown to a web server where you want to reach. So you want to reach google.com, traffic goes to the web server, right? And from there the request would come, the web server would give the put request, okay? So get request and put request, put response, I should say. It will be delivered from the internet to the proxy, and the proxy will analyze the traffic again and it will go to the client. Right. So basically, this is the 99% case that is happening, right? So when the client is sitting inside, so the traffic direction is from the client sitting inside, okay, going to internet, which is sitting outside. Okay, and the traffic direction is this generally. Then only the proxy behaves and the response is taken care, right? Now, in case of reverse proxy, what would happen? So generally what happens, I'll tell you, your LTM as an appliance or any load balancer that you think, it works on the concept of reverse proxy. Okay, it does not work on the concept of forward proxy. Remember this, very important. Okay, so it does not work on the concept of forward proxy, it works on the concept of reverse proxy. Why it is called as so? So the reason it is called as very simple again. So now what will happen is you have so you have the client, okay, and the client would make a request. The request will go to the internet. From the internet, the request would come to your proxy, okay, or I can say load balancer over here. From there, the request would go to your web server, right? Okay, so what is happening is the client is sitting where, and from there the web servers will give the response, and the response will be cached and it will go back to the client. So where is the client sitting now? This is a load balancer, right? Which location the client is sitting? The client is sitting where? Outside. The client is sitting outside and the web servers are sitting inside, and this is the basic difference, right? Why it is called as reverse? Because the request is right now received from outside and the request has been given to the inside appliances, right? So the direction is from where? From outside to inside. You can see the difference from the other diagram, right? This is the first one. This was called as what? Forward proxy. This is called as reverse proxy. Okay. The whole idea is because the proxy server is going to accept the connection from outside, and then it will take the decision of forwarding the request to the backend service. Right. Now, generally, what happens is this is okay. That's fine. And that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean you might ask me that what about the web servers are trying to go to internet for their updates? Okay, so if the web server want to do some update, might be they have got some new version of patches, they want to update those patches, they have to contact internet, right? And in that case, what happens is the web servers would act as a client, right? And that request will go to the proxy, and from there it will go to internet, from there it will go to the might be the patch server, right? From where it will download the patches will be thrown back to the proxy, and then it will hit in here, right? So in that case, even this is working as what? As a forward proxy, right? So in that particular case, what happens is the load balancers are normally called as a full proxy appliance. It is doing capable of both. Any sort of load balancers you think in the world are generally called as a full proxy appliance. So a full proxy, it does what? It will create a client connection. I'll have a client side connection, right? And I'll have a separate server side connection. So that is the first thing, right? I'll have a separate client side and a separate server side connection. All right. And full proxy, what it can do is it can manipulate some important terms here. 1 second, I don't know, my pen is being a little weak. It can manipulate, it can inspect, it can drop, right? It can do all those activities with your incoming connections or any sort of outgoing connections. So the connection is trying to leave from servers to internet or internet to servers. It can do all those elements, right? If it wants. Now the diagram would generally look like, if you think about this, very simple. So you'll have something called as LTM as a proxy or as a full proxy appliance. Okay. So I'll have a client sitting here. The client is sitting outside. I'll have some backend servers, right? And we normally have two things over here. Okay, so we'll have we'll place something called as virtual server, right? We'll keep this is client facing virtual server. Okay, and we'll have something called as a server facing virtual server. Okay, think this is on one network. Just imagine this is on 11.1.1.0. /24 network, and say this is 172.16.1.0/24 network. Okay, so I'll have a couple of virtual server as an object which I'll create in that proxy appliance. Okay, we call that as a client facing virtual server and a server facing virtual server. Think it is like SVI. All of you know what is an SVI of a switch?
Yes, switch virtual interface.
Yeah, logical IP that you configure to a VLAN, right? Think like it's an SVI. So definitely this is interface, say interface number 1, say this is interface number 2. Right? Those are my special interfaces. Okay, and this interface will be part of what this network, but what you are doing is we are actually creating a logical object called as client virtual server, so in server side virtual server, right? And on this client virtual server, what we'll do is we'll keep one IP, say it is 11.1.1.100, and say on the server side we'll keep 172.16.1.100. Okay, now what client will do, say I'm holding a company, my company is okay, so I'm holding this company called as zbnetworks.com. Now in this particular case, what happens is I've got 3 web servers that is going to provide the responses for my website. Okay, they're my web servers. Now think, when my client sitting anywhere in this world, okay, want to access this zbnetwork.com, what is the first thing they will do? Just client having internet access, want to access this website called as zbnetworks.com. What is the first thing this client would do? To open a browser and go to the URL, then the client device, what the client device would do? It will do DNS, right? It will go for a DNS query. So DNS query would be going to where? What is the meaning of DNS? It will try to resolve what? It will try to resolve regarding zbnetworks.com. What is the IP address? And whatever DNS server you have configured to the client, the request will go to that DNS server. You get the point? That request will go to that DNS server. It could be a big IP DNS appliance also, which I'll discuss later when you come to my GTM or DNS classes. But here, the client request will go to a DNS server, whatever DNS server IP you configure to the client. It could be an internal DNS, we call this LDNS or local DNS, or it could be what? It could be external DNS server, say Google DNS, right? So you've told that, hey, I don't have internal DNS in my in-house, so I'm using external DNS. So the request will go to this external DNS server, and this DNS server should have what we call as a record. Very important thing, guys. Concentrate, please. It will have a record, right? A record for IPv4, quadruple A record for IPv6. Okay. So let us say it will, check that. Okay, I'm getting a request for zbnetwork.com. Let me see my A record. In my A record, it should have the entry of what? Public websites, right? So zbnetwork.com should have some sort of IP address. Now, what IP address zbnetwork.com should have? Public IP, which will be actually 11.1.1.100. I'm just showing you basic. Okay, I'm showing you basic, but there is something else now after or before this as well. You'll not be able to understand as of now. Hold on. So let us say is zbnetwork.com. This is the IP address that we have, 11.1.1.100. Okay. So now what will happen? The client request would be made from his source IP, and the destination IP would be, the source IP is whatever, I don't care. Public IP, of course, might be private IP, whatever, don't care. The destination IP is this, which is 11.1.1.100. And how this IP address was known? By doing the DNS query to the DNS server. Once this IP address is known, then the client traffic would go to, of course, his ISP, and his ISP should have the route known via BGP. So 11.1.100 should be known by the ISP, of course, through BGP, and let us say the traffic would hit to my LTM appliance on the outside, and who will actually intercept it? The traffic would come to this client virtual server IP having this 11.1.1.100. Right? When he receives it, what it will do, it will intercept the connection, understand. So basically, you are having a TCP connection right now from the client to the LTM. Intercept the connection, understand the patterns of the traffic, right? And based on that, based on your configuration, one of the web server in the backend will be selected. Say this IP is .1, say this IP is .2 and .3 from this subnet, and then a separate TCP connection would be made from the LTM side to the selected backend server. In that case, to make the backend session, it will take the help of what? This SVI IP and with the selected server IP. Okay, so we have another server side TCP connection. So this client request would go over that TCP connection to the server. Okay, similarly, when the response comes, the response will again go from this session all the way to the client. Okay, so it is called as a full proxy. The reason, because if this web server wants to reach to internet, it can do it. Right, it can do it. So it can also have a separate connection over here, separate connection over here. So then at the end of the day, any device can work as a client, and the request can go from anywhere to anywhere. Okay, so that is the reason it is called as a full proxy appliance. And I think all of you know how TCP connections are made, right? By doing TCP three-way handshake. And how TCP connections are released? By doing TCP. Again, there is a TCP connection release state where we have this FINAC and ACK, right? So remember these things. So if I want to break a connection, I'll have FINAC and ACK. If I want to initiate a connection, I'll have SYNAC and ACK. Okay. And there are important things like you need to consider. Something like you should know about what is SSL or TLS, right? How SSL TLS work, how the certificate based security it works, what is HTTP versus HTTPS. Those are basic things that you must be aware of. The differences. Okay, how does HTTP works? What is the meaning of cookie? That's an important aspect. If anybody's asked you that, hey, I have the concept of cookies. So what is the meaning of cookies? Cookies make something called as my connection persistent. Cookies makes my connection to be what? Persistent. Very simple. So I'm going to, bookmyshow.com. I'm trying to book a ticket, right, for a movie. Now, what happened is I had some work in the middle. So what I did is I opened a new tab and I started to do work on that new tab. After I finished the work, after let us say 5 minutes, I went back to my previous booking tab and tried to resume the session. You get the point? If you want to resume the session, if it again asks me right? My again details. For example, I was actually booking the website. I mean, I was booking my ticket, where I was entering my name, my card number, and all. And suddenly some work came up. I opened a new tab and I started working on here. Now, what happens is if I want to go back, and if it again, if I refresh the page, or might be, you understand, right? If it reloads that, and again, if it asks me those information, I mean, my informations are lost. That means again, I'm creating a new session with that web server. Okay, so to make my connection persistent for some duration of time, this cookie things are important, right? So if whatever web servers I'm hitting, for example, this client, once the client connection came to server number one, server number one gave a response to the client, and once giving the response, what happens is he inserted some cookie to the client. This cookie is maintained inside the client browser, okay, having some sort of information. So now when the client makes a second request will go to the LTM, and that will have this cookie information inside the request. And once the LTM receives this cookie information, he will understand that, oh, the cookie information was given by server number one, so I should go and give the request to server number one itself. So LTMs are intelligent enough to understand the cookies, right? That has been handled by the client and the server during the transition process. So because of the cookie, the LTM can make this transition as what? As persistent. Okay, it's very, very important subject. So you should know what is the meaning of SSL, TLS, HTTP, HTTPS, what is cookies is all about, PCP port numbers, UDP port numbers, I mean, well-known ports, reserved ports, registered ports, right? So all those things, if you know, I mean, you're good to go. Okay. So I hope it is clear. No doubts about it.